I'm no Walker Bush, addition cause, no Walker Bush Cook. I'm Prairie Band Potawatomi. And I want to thank you all for being here today. I guess I want to wish you all a good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you're tuning in from. We have a pretty nice panel here today. We're going to have a deep dive discussion over Indigenous access, and we're going to touch on many topics that several tribes face across the country of accessing traditional sites and hunting, gathering, and fishing. So that's my spiel. And then we have Hillary right here. You can't hear. 1 second. So I'll go ahead and start the PowerPoint, and we can get into the business here. Let's see, let me pull it right up here. All right. Our presentation is basically Foods of Native North America. It was created by Hillary Rennick and myself, No Walker Bush Cook. And we're going to talk about the traditional foods that are sustained by people in the specific areas across the continent, from the East Coast to the West Coast. All the traditional food sheds, we will explore a little bit of why they're so pertinent and important to human existence. And they vary by region, climate, and the extensive trade network that was created from one coast to the other. This picture here kind of shows the main trade routes, the easiest access to, I guess, move and commerce. And we'll see from the West Coast, they're trading down to Wyoming. Oh, it's not even showing it. Hold on 1 second. Now it's doing it. Oh, nope, it went back to that thing. All right, hold on. All right, I'm having technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. Okay. So here's our pretty slides. They basically show just some indigenous foods that we have here. You can see the corn, the chilies, and the cactuses. There's many things across the continent that are edible that most people will not think that's edible, but through many years, from relocation to just always being here, indigenous peoples found ways to survive and find nutrients in plants and animals. Here's the trade map that I was discussing a little bit earlier. And as you can see, all these different tribes and the tribe sharing network to get products and plants and medicines and goods from one area to another.
Yeah, so the traditional foods across Native North America are extensive. Um, as you can see, like here, I have, so Alaska is so large and massive that it's, it fits a third into the continent, into the lower 48. And so I like this map because it shows the cultural boundaries, which are different than the political boundaries, because when we think of Alaska, we think of that what is now the state, but like the larger cultural region is so rich from the Yupiks and the folks hunting on the and fishing on the ice, down to Southeast Alaska. So the intertribal trade networks, as Noah briefly mentioned, are, micro and macro. So they go from the small local trade, when people are talking about, farm to fork and your local fishermen, to the larger commerce centers. And so like there's evidence of this in the archaeological record. On the right here, you see the southeastern mound builders and the ceremonial centers. And a lot of this network still exists today. And then here's a map of some of the trade routes that, are still in existence today. And also a lot of the trade routes became our interstate highways. And this is just a depiction of showing the network throughout the greater lower 48. So the importance of traditional foods, of course, culture, religion, health and wellness. Of course, during the COVID era, people are looking towards traditional foods in trying to remain healthy, of course, boost the immune system, but not just boost the immune system, your body, but having the mental, spiritual part of that, figuring out, where we are, how we are connected, not just across the landscape, but back in time and forward in time. Again, with the interconnectedness, as science is showing just how we are connected throughout the landscape, traditional knowledge. A lot of people talk about TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, or the indigenous knowledge, just the different science that we have with the plants, with our foods, with the minerals, just the minerals in our seaweeds and the grasses that the fish and the eels that we eat, just the food chain. And of course, by practice, I used to be in the Indian law arena, and so Indian folks, people will say, like, do you want to be called by your tribe or Native American or tribal, or what do you want to be called? But Indian is actually in the Constitution. So like it's part of the legal framework. So Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states that Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. So this depiction that is of just of like a Virginian Powhatan village, and just shows the agency, the traditional people working the land. And then, of course, up in Bucks area, one of my favorite holdings is a Yakima case, U.S. v. Winans on the Columbia River, which states a treaty is in between the United States and Indians is not a grant of rights to the Indians, but a grant of rights from them, a reservation of those granted. And this is still good law. This came from a fishing rights case near the Dells, Oregon. So gathering, preparing, and harvesting of traditional foods is fundamental for knowledge transmission to the next generation, for cultural survival and identity. And here, Sintaya probably, and some of you guys noticed that the nearshore fisheries, right? The smelts, the rockfish. And on the left, I had a culture camp where I showed folks how to make surfish nets, and I'm fishing in one of the photos. So the threats to traditional foods, what are the threats to this whole system? Of course, climate change, globalization, monoculture, water scarcity, urbanization, just having one species, right? How one species is could be, you don't get the diversity of foods in many places. Down here, we used to, have pink salmon. We don't have the pinks anymore. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoy your time today learning about some of the Indigenous issues that are transboundary, that are dynamic and moving, that are moving through time, and involve real people. Thank you.
Ja Waniki Saknatasu is Jonathan James Perry Nutomas Akonahanat. Hello, my name is Jonathan, and I come from the Aquina community of the Wampanoag Nation, located on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. That is my ancestral homeland and where my tribal lands reside today, and a good percentage of the population of my tribal nation. I am proud to be able to speak today on my culture and our subsistence and traditions in relation to the sea. Being island people of coastal Massachusetts, we are very rooted and connected to that place, very rooted and connected to the ocean. And so it is of the utmost importance that we have a long-lasting, respectful relationship with the sea and the beings of the sea, and stay in that place. It's been something that our people have maintained for time immemorial, and that people like myself intend to ensure and fight for all of the future generations of my nation to come. So I'm going to share screen now. Let's see. This might be a rocky road, so bear with me. So I would like to just acknowledge all of the tribal members, elders, and knowledge keepers in my nation that have as much or more of a right to speak today. But I have been requested to do this, and I'm happy to share what I know. Wampanoag territory, as you can see, we have an extensive coastal stretch of Massachusetts and northeastern Rhode Island, as well as a number of islands in the coastal stretch that provides us with great opportunity for access of the sea and all of the nourishment and support that the sea provides. And so we're actually lucky in the sense that for the shape of the land that was formed by Moshop many, many years ago, a great being whose footsteps are accredited with having formed the shape of the earth itself and separated the islands from the mainland, and is depicted in our tribal seal, as you see in this image. Moshop, one of his favorite foods was to wade out into the ocean and lift seals, or more so whales, from the ocean and strike them against the cliffs of Aquina, as the English referred to the Gayhead Cliffs of Martha's Vineyard, and actually formed the colored clay that you see depicted in that seal. my tribal nation. We as a people had such a wonderful access of amazing food resources from the ocean that we had absolutely no reason to leave the sea. And we were able to maintain 69 large communities ranging approximately 1,000 to 2,000 tribal members strong in each community, as well as many uncounted small communities between those large communities. So our population density has been quite large for a very long time. And honestly, the smallest population density that we as a people have had throughout our entire history is probably in recent years. And a lot of that has to do with the change and the pressures that have been put upon the ocean, as well as the land and stripping of the landscape, and of course war, slavery, disease, and all of the things that came as a result of being coastal people in a time of colonization. Our people experienced a lot of change and a lot of demand upon the environment with the deforestation and limitation of coastal access, as well as the difficulties that arise from losing status, losing the ability to determine use of land and community function, losing our rights to our own physical form at times, with a changing legal system and a changing population density, and the introduction of an economy that was not based on trade and relationship with sister nations and the traditional protocols, but now was based more so on monetary strength, and of course sometimes skin color and things of that nature. But major changes occurred within our tribal nation and within our communities as a result of losing access to the sea, losing access to the waterways. Of course, the deforestation affected us in the sense that we were not able to maintain the forming of and the use of our traditional dugout canoes, which could range from 8 feet long to 60 plus feet long and hold anywhere from a single adult to as many as 40 plus adults. And those vessels were sailed, paddled, poled, and used for coastal travel, the travel on the larger riverways, lakes, ponds, as well as for sporting events and harvesting, harpooning whales and sea mammals, for even military campaigns, or for our people to form alliances with other tribal nations. Being a seafaring people, of course, we had that built into our blood, into our system. And as a result, an emerging whaling industry and industries that formed in our waters off of the ocean became ideal places for our people to focus ourselves and to develop a system, to develop a connection to this changing economic situation. And of course, the demands of taxation on our lands, the demands of no longer being totally self-sufficient because we no longer had access to completely healthy land and sea. We had to start to purchase goods from stores and from merchants. We had to start to depend on that same monetary system that was so very new to us. So industries like the whaling industry, that the Yankee whaling industry, as it's oftentimes referred to, emerged out of the traditional practices of our people harpooning whales at sea and drawing them to the coast to be broken down and processed and parceled out to the community for equal sharing. Now it became a oil industry, and it was built on the back and the knowledge of our people, especially Wampanoag people, were extremely utilized for this industry, and our people rose to the standing of ship owner and captains of some of these vessels for a time. But unfortunately, that too was wrestled from our people as we started to try to develop a separation and a foothold on an economic system in our territory so that we would be able to maintain our society. So unfortunately, it was always a tug of war over the land and the sea and that coastal moraine, that coastal space that provided us the ability to maintain very strong, healthy populations and continue our traditions and our appreciation, of course, for that place. And of course, the more sustainable, respectful, traditional practice of harvesting versus harvesting only to benefit you economically. I think one of the big differences in the whaling industry, if I was to really point it out, would be that our ancestors and our people have a relationship with whales and celebrate the whales' arrival and their travel up and down the coast, and danced for them and sang for them and feasted, and there was a reciprocal relationship there, as opposed to just seeing whales as a resource and an industry and surviving off of them for economic benefit. So maintaining our connection to the ocean and our connection to our traditional lands and the sea is of the utmost importance for our people. We've been working very hard to maintain that, and we have had many struggles in that journey, especially, as I said, in recent years. But we've had a long understanding of the difficulties of being coastal people. There's a great deal to celebrate, but there's also the understanding that the ocean can rise and it can change the environment, that storms can change your reality very quickly, that animals and fish and various populations can change their method of movement and decide not to go places and not to visit places again. And so having song and dance and having a relationship with those beings helped us to understand our place in that relationship, that those beings are not our beings. We do not own them. We do celebrate them, and we have a relationship with them, and we understand that it is important to be thankful every time that you harvest, every time that you are gifted with things. And it is time to be humble and respectful and thankful even when you do not have a good harvest, even when you do not see something come back a season that you expect it to be there and that your family is relying on it. We, as a people, have experienced a lot of change from the development and the changes that were put on our spaces. So we have experienced a change in how the rivers feed the ocean and the fish that travel up the rivers to spawn, how they've been impacted by the development of farms, from factories, mills, dams, and various things that have been put in the way of those species being healthy and returning to those places. We have run into the issues of pollution, ever increasing amounts of pollution and overpopulation and destruction of coastal places. So as a result, we have always had a bit of a struggle in maintaining the connection and the true understanding of some things that are inherently part of our ancestry. So we no longer see salmon in our rivers, but my ancestors relied on salmon extensively every season, expecting another salmon visitation, and that influx of protein and very nutrient-rich fish that we danced and celebrated for and acknowledged as a gift from creation, and had such a joyous time in that harvest and processing and feeding of our families. And so you can imagine how deeply painful it is as Indigenous people to not see those beings for the first time in all of our history not return to our rivers. Those are some of the realities that we experience. And of course, as Indigenous people who value that visitation so heavily, it has the unfortunate reaction within our communities of no longer being able to show our children their arrival and teach them those beings and have that relationship. So this disruption destroys a piece of the relationship that we have as a people, and it starts to separate us in little ways. But those little separations start to accumulate over time as more and more is shaved off. The way that our people have worked so heavily to reverse that is to maintain a certain level of renaissance and effort to reestablish and adjust our way of touching and living upon the sea and harvesting from the sea and experiencing the ocean and all of its gifts, to look at different ways of fishing, to reassert our traditional vessel practices and our maritime trade and tradition. So in this slide, for instance, you see the dugout canoe that I headed up in producing, and it's a smaller version of some of our big ocean-going vessels that would be used in the deep sea. So this is just one of the ways that we've maintained some of this relationship, and that we've reasserted ourselves and maintained our activity along the coastline as a people, because there are so many ways to connect with your ancestors, and there are so many ways to continue things. And honestly, every time that paddle touches the water, it's kissing that water, and the ripples from that touch all the ripples from all the paddles before. And so that path of that dugout canoe for us today is parallel to the path of our dugout canoes 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 years before. And we connect with our ancestors. That knowledge, that continuance, and that understanding is rooted deep in our bodies and in our spirit, and can never be separated. So there is always a continuance, and there is always a future. The unfortunate reality for us as a people today is that for every movement that we make as an adjustment to a changing environment, there's all these other movements that occur. So I wanted to show just how difficult it is to be an Akuna Wampanoag person today and maintain that relationship to sea and maintain that access to the ocean. If I want to live off of our trust lands on Martha's Vineyard, then this is the reality that I'm looking at. I'm looking at $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million pieces of property just to build a house and live on Martha's Vineyard. So as a result, my tribal nation is losing land daily because we cannot afford to exist in that place. And the average home in Massachusetts in general, for my state, you can see is that price range. That is an unfortunate and very difficult hurdle for us to maintain who we are and maintain our footprint in our tribal lands and in our community, and maintain that relationship that is so fundamental. So there's an effort, of course, in Indian country, land back effort, and many other efforts to advance tribal lands and advance these traditional practices. There, for my community today, we have a shellfish hatchery, and we work quite extensively with universities to try to develop ways to combat ocean acidification, increase, for instance, scallop populations and other types of fish populations. We have a herring fish monitor, which you can go to the Natural Resource Department Facebook page for my community, Wampanoag Tribe of Gayadequina. You can go to that and actually go onto the live webcam and watch the herring swim up the river into Squibnocket Pond on Martha's Vineyard. And what's really fun is to see the herring, and you'll see herring, sea bass or striped bass, and then otter. And you just, it's really funny to check that live webcam and see the activity that goes on there. We as tribal members today are heavily invested in fishing, charter fishing. We are shell fishermen. We have many wampum artists, including later on you'll be speaking with my sister Elizabeth James Perry, who is a shell carver and maintains the traditional wampum carving practice, making the sakwa piak and the wampum piak, which is very important for us as a people. It's healing. It is part of our shell bead belts that are negotiations with the other tribal nations were rooted with or recorded with, as well as very full gifts and healing gifts to other nations, other people, leadership, and very young people, for instance. So we have many ways that we're maintaining and advancing, and we hope as time moves forward that we are able to be a major part, a major voice in the restoration efforts and the activities that are occurring on our coastline. We have had that relationship for so long. We have that knowledge base, and we have the long-term observations to see what does and does not work, and to have a better understanding of what we need to do as modern people to ensure that there's going to be a continuing marine tradition for all people, for all of us. We are all sharing this place. We are all now stewards of the land and the sea and that connection point. And so I would like to kind of wrap up by saying, for our people, we believe that the place of creation is where the ocean and the earth meet and creates the clay and foam. That is the perfect medium for creation. And we say that that is where the very first humans were formed, from that clay. They were formed by Manat, by the Creator, and given life. And that is who we are today. And as long as we have that point of earth and sea coming together, then we will always have life. Katapatash, I want to thank you for this time, and I look forward to speaking further on these issues, and I am going to try to exit out of here. All right.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was very powerful, those images you shared with us. Again, those canoes in the water, that really means a lot, on in the water by themselves with the commercial liners around, you guys in your own existence, just uh, staying the pace, it's good to see. Next on our list is Melanie Brown, and she will be presenting over um, culture traditions and both commercial and subsistence fishing. Hey, Melanie.
Hello, good morning. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I loved everything that you had to say and share. And thank you so much, Hillary and Noah. I'm really glad that you shared the Alaska Native Language map, Hillary. It's a really amazing visual representation of people. And I think the fact that, so I'm going to be talking about Bristol Bay. Imagine this is a map of Alaska. The Aleutians go out this way. The southeast panhandle goes this way. And Bristol Bay sits right up here. And if you line that up with the Alaska Native Language map, you'll quickly notice that there is a confluence of cultures that exists there. On the coast, you have the Sugpiaq people, and the Yupik people. And then if you go upriver, the Dena'ina people reside upriver. They're a Dene people. And the fact that all these cultures coalesce in this place speaks volumes to the richness of that land and the abundance of the salmon that still exists there. And it's under threat. But I'll be talking more about, the resources that the people access in that place. I'm going to do my best anyway. Sorry, I didn't even say hello. So Jamai, Guyana, Tailuchi, and Yupik, that means hello. And thank you for being here. My Yupik name is Taikuba. My great-grandmother gave me that name the first time she met me when I was a month old, and I had to travel all the way from Tlingit to get to Bristol Bay because my father was teaching at a BIA boarding school in Sitka, where I was born. It was the boarding school that he attended. My father is from the north. He's Yupik and Inupiaq, and he became a fisherman when he met my mother at the university in Fairbanks. And my mother is from, she was born on the Naknek River in the town that is named for the river. And I've been told by my elder friends in Nustuyahak that Naknek means lucky place. They said, even if you're a bum fisherman, you go to the Naknek, you'll catch lots of fish. And I was really happy to learn that from them. And well, I'm gonna pull up some slides. Uh-oh. So I wanted to share this slide because I feel like it speaks volumes in so many ways. Those are our prized kings that we love. Bristol Bay is known for its sockeye salmon because sockeye salmon are so abundant there, but we love our king salmon. It's so rich. And also, I wanted you to see this beautiful technology that existed. That's a Badarka, and Alaska Native coastal people were very skilled paddlers, and especially the Unangan people. You may be more familiar with the term Aleut, but Unangan is the self-given name of the people, and they were known as very skilled paddlers. And there are accounts in Russian history that attest to paddlers outpacing sailing ships because the people were such efficient paddlers and skilled and strong. And so they knew how to ride the wakes and surf the waves. And yeah, so it's estimated that the first people of Bristol Bay got there about somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. But I think it's really important to understand how the people moved with the fish and game, that they lived in relation with. And so, you know, people would go where the fish were when it was time to get fish, preserve them for the winter. And when it was time to get a moose, people knew where they could find a moose or caribou. And so I really wanted to just emphasize that Alaskan Native people were such a migratory people. And, you know, as trade has been referenced by everybody that's spoken, you know, that trade existed. But this photograph, I just think is so wonderful, because you can see that even though contact has already been made clearly, because these men are not wearing traditional clothing, they were still maintaining their knowledge of their transportation technology, which has since been replaced by more modern boats, by more modern fishing boats. But I love this photograph. And then sort of to move on to the onset of the commercial fishery, which came in after the disruption of the Russian occupation, which began when Vitus Bering made landfall in Alaska when he was commissioned by the Russians to explore for them. That contact was made in 1741, and then soon after the Russians came in to exploit the fur trade and decimate native sea otter populations and enslaved native people to hunt for them. And they would show their power by seeing how many Unangan men they could line up and shoot, and see how many men a bullet could go through. That's the kind of terror that was brought upon the people. But eventually, you know, the Russian church came in, and the trading company, and then there was, you know, when cultures come together, there's mixing. And so the Russian American company created a lot of more movement and trade and mixing of people. There was status that was granted to native people that was then, you know, it fell away when the Russians sold Alaska to the United States. And it was soon after that the commercial canneries and the commercial fishing industry was established. In Bristol Bay, it happened around 1886, and that was the same in Southeast Alaska as well. That's where the biggest canneries were established. And it created more opportunity for Alaska's first people to start living a blended existence of, participating in the cash economy, because they got jobs in the canneries. And if you're able to read this, I hope it's big enough so that you can read it. You'll see that Indigenous people were not allowed to fish until the 1930s. And it was around that time that my great-grandfather, Paul Chacon, mustered up the courage to go to a company foreman and ask if he could be given a company sailboat, a double-ender sailboat that up to that point had only been granted to Swedish and Italian immigrants that were brought up in ships to exploit the fishery. But both of my great-grandparents worked in the canneries until they became fishermen themselves. When my great-grandpa got too old to row, he staked out a set net site outside the mouth of the Naknek River. And that's that is where I continue to fish to this day with my children. My children represent the fifth generation of commercial fishers. So I wanted to share this photograph because it clearly, it was taken after the onset of the commercial fishery, because in the background you can see a roof, a corrugated metal roof that's been weathered. And in the background, if you look to the right of the photo, you'll see in the background, I'm fairly certain that that is the Naknek River. And the opposite bank that you see is the bank of South Naknek. And where this fish rack lies, I'm fairly certain that it stands where the Naknek Trading Company store exists today. I love this. To me, this is like the highest form of wealth, because it's, you know, it's dried salmon. You don't have to worry about if your freezer goes out. You know, this is food that can take people through a whole winter. And so clearly these traditions continued even after the onset of the commercial fishery, and they still exist to this day. When I need to get my smoked fish for the winter, I go to my friend Carla Harris, and she told me that she will teach me how to make her style of smoked fish someday. It's on my bucket list, but unfortunately it's too hard to tend to a smokehouse when you're in the midst of a commercial fishing season. And so this I have deemed as my transition into being an elder. I want to transition when I'm not strong enough to commercial fish anymore and pull gear and pick fish. At least on a intense scale like the commercial fishery is in Bristol Bay, it is my hope that I will learn how to make smoked fish in this way. This is my great-grandfather, Paul Chacon, holding the big king, and my cousin, Alec Alvarez, who used to crew for my great-grandpa until he got his own drift boat. But I can only assume that this photograph was taken in front of the bank that I fished today outside of the mouth of the Naknek River. And my great-grandpa was still fishing when I started fishing. I started fishing when I was 10 years old in 1979. And my older sister, she started when she was 10 years old, and my little sister did too. And now my nieces fish too. And yeah, it was kind of the magic age that we got started. But and I've fished with my mother for years, and my father was a drift fisherman for over 50 years. But right here, I really wanted to share this photograph with you, because to me, my great-grandparents, they represent the home in my heart. And I believe it's because of the strength and fortitude that enabled them to survive even when they were orphaned in the Great Death, and to continue. And I firmly believe that it's sorry. It's because of the salmon that they were able to continue. And I feel like the salmon showed them a way forward, and gave them hope when really, in my opinion, all they should have had was despair. But they kept going, and I feel like I owe my existence to them and the salmon. And of course, it's true of the hardships that my father's side of the family endured as well. There was such an onslaught of things that befell Alaska's first people once contact was made. And I wanted to share this because it's it's just dear to me because my great grandparents. This was the last summer that we were able to all be together before my grandfather died, and then there are 5 generations of people in this photograph. My niece, it was my parents' first beloved grandchild, and she fishes to this day. And so my great grandparents, they lived long enough to know their great granddaughter. Unfortunately, my grandmother is missing in this photograph because she had an altercation with the moose, and the moose won. Sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful to her memory, but she was kicked by a moose, and she didn't make it. But the joy of my niece being born was a nice continuance of our family. And I ended up glossing over a lot of things here because I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but I'm hoping that we can discuss some things deeper in the breakout sessions. And I'm going to share a couple of links of pieces that I wrote about my great grandparents so that you can know more about the beauty of their love and how they always made us feel safe and warm and loved. And yeah, I'm gonna pass it on to Buck though, so he has enough time to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Those pictures are very substantial in that connectedness we have. And as Melanie stated, we're going to move to Buck Jones, and Buck is going to talk a little bit about, let's see. Cultural relevance of salmon and the commercial supply chain to support livelihoods. Take it away, Buck.
Thank you, Noah. Let me see if I can get to where I need to be. Morning, my name is Buck Jones. I'm an enrolled Cayuse tribal member, which is a band, one of the bands of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Northeast Oregon. I work for Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, which is a technical and advisory arm of the 4 treaty tribes that have treaty fishing rights in the Columbia River. So I think I'm getting to where I need to be. So I just want to talk a little bit about I guess about our treaty fishing rights and kind of the chronological history of our fishing rights and our people, I guess, as tribal people. A lot of what has already been shared is kind of how tribal people are, throughout Turtle Island here. We our foods and our animals are part of our culture. The fish, at least in our area, are culturally relevant. They're also they're also a commercial entity at one thing, but it hasn't always, it's had its struggles throughout history and stuff. When we first start, our people have been fishing since time immemorial, and some of this will be not too repetitive, but it's been stated before in Hillary's some comments. Actually, we share some slides even. So our people have been fishing for thousands of years along the Columbia River Basin. salmon is a staple of our life, both our foundation of our culture and and our economy at different times. As Hillary mentioned, there was trade routes that we had or whatever, and the region right here is the Salilo village, which is a trade economy for our people for thousands of years or whatever before westward expansion. We had these trade routes with other tribal entities, and then even as westward expansion encroached on us, it is actually a trade route with non-tribal people as well. So we as I mentioned, it is a commercial entity, but it's all culturally relevant. So before we even when the salmon return, and this is getting to be this kind of the time or whatever, where we have to honor the salmon, that come back. So before we have any commercial seasons or any salmon catching or whatever. Throughout history, we've always had salmon's a first food for our people, so we have first food ceremonies for our people. Our first salmon ceremony, just something that I think is in context that kind of to put this in a how I could say how it went is that the creator back in the day, and most all tribal people in their creation story has some kind of, whether it be food or plant or animal in their creation story. So back and just not going into a complete creation story for us, but the creator asked when we were becoming humans, who would step up and who would who will feed our people as people. And the salmon stood up and said that that they'll come back, and they'll come back in the spring and the fall. And then the deer also said that they can take the body of the deer, and it'll use its cover to help the humans cover himself. And then the roots came in the spring, and the berries, they'll come in the early fall, and so they'll take care of the people. So that was like a law that was created for our people, so in doing that, then we got to be good stewards of the land for our people. I think that that means we got to take care of the environment, take care of the water that our fishery turn in, both being in the tributaries. So I just wanted to kind of say that. This is just some photos of a current day first salmon feast that we have in the Salilo area in one of our traditional longhouses. So treaties were signed in the 1850s with our people, and we ceded a lot of land or whatever for that, and this is some of the land that we ceded. This is our current day reservations that are inside the darkest part of the like the warm springs. That's the current day reservation. But when we signed treaties, we was given this whole land and the whole outstanding area, and then all the pink area was ceded lands that we had given away. So we never, our ancestors would have never given up, all this land, not to be able to, to hunt and gather and fish at our spots that we have fished and gathered since time immemorial. But some of those treaties, when they were signed, we did. When they signed, we reserved those rights at our usual and accustomed spots, with our tribal, for our tribal people. And if you, as you can see, some of our reservations, they're not on the Columbia River where we fished, where Salilo Falls was. So the foresight that ancestors had to sign those treaties, in our region was I mean, just instrumental, because we've had throughout history, have had to fight, for those rights or whatever. One of the first major fishing rights that was that went all the way to the Supreme Court was a case called U.S. versus Winans, where it said that the treaty tribes had reserved the rights crossing lands to get to their usual and accustomed spots, and that's that's still upheld to this day or whatever. I know my friends from the East or whatever. I was at a conference and they told me that where Jonathan was talking about, they used that Supreme Court case to get across land access to get to their tribal fisheries, and so this was really, really important piece of treaty law, to go all the way to the Supreme Court or whatever. And it was, as Hillary mentioned, it was in the Constitution or whatever. So this was, early in history in 1905. This is quite a while ago. So part of what when the dam started coming into our area or whatever, that was really that was really hurtful to our people, because the Columbia River at that time was a free flowing river or whatever, and it just it like inundated some of our traditional fishing areas, our villages, and our fishing and access sites where we used to traditional, including Salilo there. But they in doing that, Congress passed the Bonneville Project Act that would actually help mitigate a few thousand miles of fish habitat. It created an act that promised that the fish lost because of the dams would be replaced, and annual returns back before European contact was, up into 11 million to, 15 million salmon returning up the Columbia River. And when those dams start coming in, it really hurt, it hurt the impact of the people. The first one that started in our area was the Bonneville Dam in 1938. And so that was, just, it kind of put the free flowing river into something that looks just like not even a river. Sometimes it makes it look like, I thought I had a picture of a flow. It took away this kind of action at these falls and buried those sites. So our people, had set up these platforms so that they could fish, and then it just kind of turned them into lakes or whatever. So after these dams had came in and inundated our fishing people, we had to keep having like battles over the access of our fish or whatever, and the Supreme Court, in many cases helped our people, because of the treaty law. It says that treaty law takes precedent over states, because they was trying to at one time make our people buy license to fish. And why would we ever have to buy a license from a state or whatever when we was there before a state? So the state has no power to say that a tribal, a sovereign nation has to buy a license or whatever. But that being said, they did the court did rule that the state could regulate, treaty fisheries for the purpose of conservation. Well, we was conservative in our ways, we had thought or whatever, because we, how chiefs and stuff would say, well, now's the time to fish, and now's not the time, we only took what we needed and we saved in the other times for the winter and things like that. So but that's the battles that we had faced at the time or whatever. So when they inundated and when those dams flooded our area, they did promise us that they would return. They would return, you know, our traditional fishing villages and give us treaty fishing access sites, and that was a promise by the people or by the Congress or whatever, and they did hold their word to a point, but it took over 50 years for that to happen, where they've built like 31 treaty fishing access sites along the river here on both sides of the river. But in doing that too, you know, when they flooded some non-tribal places, they relocated them and gave them infrastructure, gave them housing, gave them access to power. And now some of these sites that we got along the river, people was always from the river. They didn't want to go back to their member reservation. And so they've always been on the river or whatever. And these sites now, they was built for, I would say, seasonal use for when the salmon came. But what kind of like with society, there's a lot of homelessness and things like that, where people didn't want to go to the reservation and they live on these sites. They'll have, some of them have one community like shower and bathrooms and things like that, and they live in more or less like a camping society or out in the environment. And it's really you know, we see pictures of, I wish I had a picture, we see pictures of how people live in like third world conditions. Well, some of these conditions are right here in along the Columbia River, our kind of third world, because they're living in places that have camp trailers with no power, and they're living throughout the winter, and it can get really windy and stuff like that. So it is, but it just did show that, you know, they that is their home, and that they don't want to go back to the reservations. So we're working on legislation for that or whatever to improve these treaty fishing access sites. I think that, you know, this new administration, you know, has shown that they're really, you know, kind of, it's been really good to see that the funding that they've provided and the appointees that they've had, you know, including Deb Haaland for the Interior, Secretary of the Interior, is a good sign, you know. But that just shows how long we've been as a people, that it's taken till the year 2020 for, you know, for something this major to happen or whatever. So I think that when Celilo Falls was really buried underwater, it was a really sad day. This happened in 1957 with the creation of the Dalles Dam, and you know, it took away that trade route. It took away the fishing access sites that we had, or the fishing, you know, the villages and the river there, you know, like this. And that was a sad time for our days. So, you know, we just kept doing what we had to do, because the fish, you know, that is part of us, our people. And going, and a real major, we had major decision in the late 60s called the Bolt decision, where that promised, you know, it started in the Puget Sound area or whatever, with the right to take, you know, 50% of the salmon, and that was major for our people, because it, you know, it proved again that the tribes and the treaty tribes had the rights to that, to those fish or whatever. And you know, and it still went to battles during fishing wars and things like that, you know. So you know, are some of the people that fought for our rights, you know, like Atway Billy Frank, and like Atway David So Happy, you know, people that was just doing what they knew was right in their thing. they got arrested and went to federal court, and I look at the battles that our people have done for our rights to, to keep catching the salmon, and my hands just go up to them, because they was looking out, like, like our elders were when they signed the treaties for us now or whatever. And I think that we should be looking out for, our elders, our ancestors, or our kids coming up, and their grandkids, that they have access to catch these fish. And that means being good stewards of the land, like I mentioned before, taking care of the river, taking care of the water, taking care of the forests. And we have a lot of impacts with global warming, but it's our responsibility, for this to happen, for our future, of our kids, or we won't be we won't have that fortitude of our ancestors when they taught us the things that we've been taught. So it's very important, or whatever, that we keep this in mind. And I think I'm really kind of done with what my piece is, or whatever. I just wanted to end on that. We want to always have access to catch a beautiful salmon like this, and we've had to be at the table at some different Pacific Salmon Commission meetings, and so that we have returns, and with the fishing wars, and we've dealt with pandemics before, and we're going through a pandemic now, and our people have shown that we have that we can sustain through these pandemics, and our ancestors faced tough times, but we're still here. And I think the power of our tribal people, will continue to have battles, and we'll sustain through those. So that's my presentation.
That was my question, but I really appreciate that. It's a nice little outlook that we're looking at there.
We'll check in with different groups that met, which would, we'll probably start with like Chinook, Sockeye, and go from there. You think?
Excellent. Yeah, that'll work perfect.
Okay. Everybody should be back. So who do we have that was in the Chinook group with Buck that might be able to sort of share out a little bit of some of the conversation there, any of the questions or themes? If you want to ask for permission to share your camera or microphone, or put it in the chat, that would be great. That way we can sort of bounce those questions around to the panel a little bit, and then move on to the next group.
So do you want me to do that, or people that was in the group call us?
Whoever, it's really, it's up to you all. So if you're ready to share, that'd be great, Buck.
We had a real small group that when we just kind of did one-on-ones when we first started. Then we got a couple more participants, Noah and Sunny, and we had representatives that was from the East Coast. And I think a couple of things that we just shared is about at least on my end, I shared about how the themes, I guess, of the historic battles that we've had throughout Indian country are relevant, across from one side of Turtle Island all the way to the other side of Turtle Island. One thing that was I mentioned or whatever is that land access, sometimes water access is a barrier, to our gathering or fishing. I mentioned in our area that there could be traditional places that our people have went throughout years, and it might be on private property or whatever, and the landowners may have changed or whatever. So when they come back during this time of year to go get traditional foods or medicines, the new landowners will have no trespassing and no access. But how can that be? Our people don't believe in borders and stuff like that, and they should still always have access. So that's kind of basically it. And talked about how I had met a fisher from Wampanoag in Mashpee area or whatever, and used some of our treaty Supreme Court decisions, to get access to and Martha's Vineyard, go fishing or whatever. So I think that we're all in this battle together.
Absolutely. And I mean, that resonates with the discussion that we had with Jonathan's group. Jonathan, you want to pop in here, but that's absolutely it. I mean, and that's why having these types of conversations seems to be so important, is broadening that awareness. The more that we have these kinds of conversations, the more that we broaden awareness about, what these connections, these cultural connections mean and why they're so important. I think that's significant. So yeah, Jonathan, that just chimes right in with what we were talking about too.
Absolutely. I think that the challenge really oftentimes is that the concepts of protecting and caring for certain species around us and controlling a take it affects Native communities, because our communities have always maintained a respectful relationship and have not overtaken all these years, right? And then the creating of certain laws and policies and conservations and things of that nature have unevenly been levied against Indigenous populations to limit access, to control the health and vitality of the communities, to disenfranchise Native connection to certain spaces and certain things, right? And so it goes way back. Like, you can look at court cases from the 1600s, for instance, that talk about forbidding Native people from building weirs and using that technology in certain locations to fish, while colonists were still using weirs that they had learned about from watching Native people further down the river. So like they were saying, oh, well, Native people can no longer take fish here, but we'll take the fish. Or, and so it's constantly been an issue. And luckily, of course, there have been advances with other Native nations throughout the country, and certain circumstances where our people have been able to say, look, over here's a court case that has allowed this nation to reaffirm its rights, its treaty rights, or its subsistence and harvesting rights in this space, or assert that waterways contained on trust lands or treaty lands or tribal lands are also part of that access point. And you see over and over again, if you go outside of the United States and you go into Canada, and you go into like New Brunswick and that area, you see these battles over the fisheries there. and Mi'kmaq people, for instance, going through tremendous troubles asserting their rights and their ability and their subsistence living practices. And, you know, they're also in sort of the same place that a lot of us are, just in a different country, so to speak. Like, you know, not so much for Native people, but for everyone else. You know, so those are you know, it's an ongoing issue, but luckily there have been gains here and there that have aided our people. One huge issue, you know, in getting federal recognition for my tribal nation, the state of Massachusetts demanded that we give up our subsistence rights, and we had to fight to get them back. Essentially, you know, we were caught between a rock and a hard place where we were losing lands and land values were increasing, and some of the very culturally significant lands were under threat of being taken and developed. And, you know, so we were forced to agree to terms for recognition that were really contrary to who we are as a people. But, you know, then we had to turn around and start to fight back and say these rights were illegally taken from us. Like these never should have been on the negotiating table in the first place. You know, so yeah, I don't want to talk too long on that.
But I mean, those are really central issues too. And actually, it'd be great to invite Elizabeth into the conversation here from her perspective on the group that she led. Just ask for your screen to be shared to hear what you all spoke about in that session and whether there are connections there.
Yeah, we had some really good discussion. Someone was asking me about treaty rights and hunting and fishing rights. I wasn't addressing the more recent work to become a federally recognized tribe, but I was talking more so about less formal treaties. There are some early treaties. They're like okay, but as a Native person, you're kind of skeptical because they were oral treaties that somebody non-Native wrote down later. And then later on in treaties and agreements, there were oral agreements, and then they would take advantage of the fact that not all of us were speaking and writing in English, and write down what they wanted to anyway, their own terms about like, yeah, we were going to leave everything and stop doing this or that or the other in some instances. But if you look at other records like land deeds and some of the other communications, wills are another great source. Once Native people were becoming more and more literate, men and women were writing, negotiating land deeds. Sachems of tribes and song squaws, male and female leaders, were saying, we'll allow your group of English to live here in this specific area. It's not really forever, although obviously those terms are sort of imaginatively read into all agreements with tribes, right? Like they somehow were being given the right to stay here forever and do whatever they wanted for just like some hose and a copper kettle and a bit of wool. It's not real life. That's not how we do things. Like you revisit agreements, you adjust them, you see how relationships are working. That's how we work as Native nations. You have to practice regular diplomacy and interaction and maintain stuff. So they would say, yep, you can put some houses here and live here. But we're going to maintain our access to the fisheries here. We expect to maintain access to the beach over here at Cutty-Hunk or Ponegantsit or Aquina, wherever, because we're going to harvest beach whales there. We never gave up, the right to set up weetus, our houses, and shade arbors covered with cattail, and harvest and butcher whales right there on the beach on Cape Cod. It would change the whole tourist industry would change dramatically, I think, if we went back to doing that. But we still have the right to do that. In it, a lot of it is embodied more so in those documents and less so in, as far as I've found. I'm not saying there couldn't be something buried somewhere, even in someone's house, who knows, or in England, whatever, that says more. But there's those documents that by themselves, there's such a record and there's such an abundance of, we're maintaining, we will be back. We're not going anywhere. we will be getting the herring. We're going to be there for sturgeon. We're not even going to sell you the sturgeon because we like it a lot. We only harvest at a certain time of the year. It's really good for us. We would sell them whale, but the English would comment that we value the sturgeon so much that it was really, really difficult to get us to part with any. So you just see that such a strong relationship to the coast and the resources, and a woman actually left in her woman of prominence on Martha's Vineyard on Nope Bay, which is the island where my reservation is. Back in the 18th century, some Native people were using a will when they were getting older. And she was disposing of her property, her lands and her best dress and, her furniture or whatever. And she said, and I leave to my descendants our family's right to the whale's tail forever. And as whatever clan she was, I don't know, I have to figure out what the reckoning was, but by clan, you had access to a certain part of the whale, whether it was the head or the tail or whatever. And she was making sure that was set down because she knew the new thing was written documents, and she just wanted to make sure that for thousands of years, her family would continue to have that right. So I think it's really special to be able to find those. And maybe bittersweet, now we're living in a time when, yes, some whale species maybe have come back to some degree, or the minkies have filled in a niche and they're very numerous, but other species are not so numerous. But yet, we've had these tantalizing glimpses of whales coming back and frolicking under the cliffs. And, I think people are starting to second guess the whole full speed ahead at all times of year, because they realize, oh no, the whales are actually here year round, and we need to start being careful or they're just going to go away altogether. So.
Absolutely. And that strikes on something that's really important is understanding, nature's rhythms and, living by that. And that's something that we've gone so far away from in so many different places. And that's these are lessons to be learned. That's why we're talking about broadening awareness. I'd like to bring Hillary in here to chat about her session, and also because I know that they were talking about industrial impacts on waterways affecting resources downstream, but also this discussion about treaties as well, which is Hillary is very well versed in. So Hillary, why don't you come in and share out a little bit from your group and sort of that perspective around upstream impacts and everything.
Sure. Yeah, I had a small group too. Those born in March and April. I guess it's not that common amongst the fish crew. I'm just kidding. And so yeah, we talked about just lampreys. That was the name of the group. It was lamprey eels, and so a little bit about both Columbia River eels, Herman Creek, the Willamette Falls, and then also harvesting lamprey from at the mouth of the Klamath River. And so in looking at conservation and quote unquote helping those species, how far can we go without addressing the pollution, the zoning, the over use of vacation homes which are now year round, right? Residences and just hypoxia, like all the different issues of dissolved oxygens and the environmental conditions, right? And then we also discussed, and it was hard because the folks on they weren't able to unmute, and so so it was like futuristic between the chatting and then talking to the camera. And so but also discussing the similarities of what Jonathan was saying, just but between what we think, what we, we're all, well, at least I'm a product of the California school system, right? So I have, my Indigenous upbringing, which my family taught, every day when I got home from school. But in school, what we're taught is how to survive in this modern world, right? And so in that teaching, with Jonathan's people, Elizabeth's people, what we're taught is, the beginning of, what is it, third or fourth grade social studies, right? You're taught about those, those tribes, and then they kind of go away until we learn later on fifth grade about social studies and like the Indian Wars, and then that's it, right? So even for me as a West Coast, tribal person, I have traveled a lot. I've been fortunate to be able to study in Ireland and look at, study their species of salmon and how precious it was to those traditional people. And then the colonization of the Irish, but also just looking at the similarities, right? So we all choose how we look at the world. Do we view the world through a lens of, oh yeah, this is very similar to where I am, or do we view through the lens of everybody's different and it's wrong, right? So just looking at the objective, subjective, but how do we, in this era, having been, for the most part, most of us traveled very little this last year, how do we, it is our time, right? It is our time in this historical moment to see where we go collectively, we, all of us, tribal folks, non-tribal, just people connected to the environment wherever they're at, right? Colleagues, I never asked you actually, like, besides, I know that you live in Maine, but like, I'm sure that you feel an affinity and a connectedness to your landscape. So all of us, right, having that agency of what are we going to do collectively and how do we move forward? And I think part of that is part of why you even probably wanted this forum to discuss, right? Because you have to figure out where we were, where we're at, and then where we're going to go. Like, what is our call to action? All of us, right? And without pointing fingers anyway, we just have to look at like what is actually happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Hillary. And that's such a beautiful point. I'm from New Orleans. So, we were just talking about this in the discussion with Jonathan. The Mississippi River, the mouth of the Mississippi River has an 8,000 square mile dead zone because of all of the stuff that's coming down, all the industrialization we've done, all of the industrial agriculture that's come down. So, New Orleans is always going to be my home, but it just saddens me to see that. So you're absolutely right. The sort of recognition of why our connection to our home base is important. These connections to nature in general are so important. And as you said, how do we share that? How do we make sure that it's a collective understanding, not just intertribal or non-intertribal, but everyone together? Having that shared relationship to the resource, that shared respect for the resource, and then making sure we, spread that message. To me, that seems pretty fundamental to sort of the conversation that we're having here. And I think, this may be a great time to bring in Santaye, because you just mentioned in the comment about how her family were prohibited from their fish camp. So Sunny, could you share some of that perspective here? Because I think it really fits in with what we're talking about.
I was just thinking about that too, and just the idea of access and continued access and the prevention of it, or the attempt to prevent. So we have a traditional fish camp that's right along the Pacific coast, and it actually was owned by two sisters, and anyway, they lost the land due to taxes that they didn't realize they had to pay, and there was all these things that switched hands. And a private landowner used to give my grandmother permission to allow us to cross his property because she thought that was the right thing to do, to ask for that permission to go down there, because she was just trying to be respectful. And we would still every year go down to this particular fish camp area that we have been going to since the beginning of time for us. And we were still trying to access this property. Well, what ended up happening was the land was sold. You know, it's a oceanfront property, and they created a homeowners association on it with these $1 million homes on there, and they tried to prevent us from then going and accessing where we would bring our camp things down and be able to get our elders access to the camp. And so we started, accessing in other ways. So we would, take down their fence, or started doing all these things. Well, then when we met with legal counsel, they actually said that if we would have taken down fences and crossed over without permission for another 2 years, it would have solidified that access. But since my grandmother had asked permission, it kind of hindered us. And so in some ways, that was heartbreaking for us as a people, because it's like, you try to be somewhat kind and live in this world, but then you're making us be outlaws to still do what we've always done, and to access the places that mean so much to us, and the resources that we continue to use to this day and give to our children. And yet we have to be breaking the law and doing these things that we didn't want to have to do to maintain that. So that was a really big eye-opening experience for me as, a young person growing up. I was like, man, why they gotta always make us be outlaws to live our ways and to eat our traditional foods and access our places? But that's all part of who we are too, and it strengthens us as a people, I think. And we just continue to persevere through that, and our connection to those places, they can't take it away no matter what. So that's part of our story for Fish Camp. And we still battle things to this day, but we're never going to stop going there, no matter the depletion of the resources right now, because our Earth's unbalanced and our ocean's sick. And so the fish aren't running like they used to, but we still continue to go down there because it's that important for the tradition, the culture, but also to keep seeing these resources are important to us. And so that's part of our balance of keeping the world healthy.
Well, thank you so much, Sonny, because that's it. It's sort of like creating this sense of other, when we're setting up those sort of arbitrary rules, and by doing that, the divisions are inherent, and we need to sort of collectively bring about this sense of we, the sense of us, and why this needs to be a sort of unified respect for all of these different cultures, and all of the importance of the living with the ecosystem around you, and respecting the natural resources around you. It seems to keep coming back to that. Noah, did you want to chime in here, as we've been sort of circling around on these different perspectives? You had mentioned sort of the treaty rights again.
Yeah, I guess what I'd like to say is, well, I guess I'll introduce myself. I'll say, Houghton Anishinaabe, no Wakabushkuk. I'm Prairie Band Potawatomi, and we're located in Kansas currently. We are a relocated tribe, and my ancestral access would have been to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River, out to the Atlantic. And basically, it's just the treaty access. The Potawatomi people were one of the peoples who had the most treaties with the United States government. And with those treaties was the access to the lands that they were moved to along the way to Kansas. So me trying to go back to one of our ancestral places, we would face basically conflict through either the state landowners, or possibly federal action, and it's just a matter of implementing our sovereign rights. And what was touched on a lot was trespass, and the federal law says that we can cross another land as long as we go unmolested, and we're not cutting down fences, we're not tearing down gates, we're not killing the animals and cattle that are ranchers or whatever it may be, and to get to our other lands or to the gathering spots or fishing places. And that's kind of the things we see nowadays. So that's just my story as a removed tribe who was relocated. And hearing these stories from people on the East Coast and the West Coast, it's a relevant issue, and it's around today. And hopefully there'll be some sort of federal action that reinforces these treaty rights, because it seems a lot of the times we are educating local governments, whether it be state or counties, that we have access to these places by law, and having to educate these people time and time over again, it's redundant. And you never know. Landowners, they approach with guns, and say, you guys are trespassing. Well, we're not really trespassing. We have access to these places, and yes, your current land is in the way from me getting to there, but it's just one of those things. We got to deal with as indigenous people. So yeah, that's what I got to say about that.
Well, thanks, Noah. And I mean, again, this seems like it's a common thread, and how to manage, get back to those connections that were already there before others came in and implemented arbitrary, rules around it. We're running a little bit behind, but I think it would be good so that we can allow Elizabeth and Sunny to tell their stories. Elizabeth, are you ready to tell your story with us? Because we'd love to hear you flesh out talking about your art and the inspiration for all of that.
Sure. Just checking to see that I'm not muted.
Nope,
okay,
you're good.
So let me just do the screen sharing bit. I do have a PowerPoint. Okay, do I just hit entire screen? Was that okay? Thank you. Sorry.
Yes. And then just click on your slide deck.
Okay, can everybody see this? Great, thank you.
Yes.
I'm actually on the wrong slide, but although maybe not, I was starting with the sturgeon there in that screen. So Wanikisak, everybody. My name's Elizabeth James Perry, and I'm a Quinawampanoag from Martha's Vineyard. I currently live on the mainland, about maybe 5 miles across the water, or less, actually, probably a little bit less than that, in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, which was the community of Aponegantsit, and near Acushnet. So I have various things to share today. So I have a dual background, both as a marine biologist who's done fisheries research in the Atlantic, and also as a primarily traditional artist. I branch out sometimes, but I do like the traditional processes and the way they tie us to the seasons and tie us to the land. And it keeps me really connected and really mindful. And, sometimes we don't just learn by, sort of formally studying something or looking at something in a book or on a show, but feeling it through our hands or tasting it or knowing, what the milkweed smell like in the summertime and things like that. So there's other ways of knowing it and learning and relearning, I think, as well. So this is actually some photography that I've done. This is not a gay head. This is actually from Manitowoc, which is also called later Christiantown. So it was a praying community on Martha's Vineyard, where we also have ancestry. And this was a nice day. It wasn't super bright, so there wasn't a bunch of glare off the water. And so there's just a lovely greenish depth that you can appreciate from the high spot that I was standing at. This is a photograph of the headwaters of the Charles River, which, goes through Boston. It's, appears in a lot of records, early trade and traffic with tribal people in the area. So this is coastal Massachusetts in the east. But this is a ways inland. This is at the headwater, and headwaters are really special places to tribal people, at least in my tribe, but I think probably that's shared amongst a lot of people. We're so water oriented. Pre-technology, you needed to go where the ocean was. You needed to go where the fresh water was. And so paying your respects at the headwater was a key piece of our identity as people. This was an area that, unfortunately, there was going to be blasting nearby to develop a big office park. So it was going to destroy a big ceremonial complex that we found there, or refound, I guess, rediscovered, maybe you'd say. So much land in Massachusetts is in private hands, and there isn't really free access. So working for my tribe, I had the privilege of being able to go to a lot of places that would be difficult for me to access. And beyond that, working for my tribe in the Historic Preservation Office, because I needed to monitor archaeology and do site visits beforehand, or look at plants, or whatever, talk to developers, I get to revisit places sometimes for like months or years in some instances at a time. And so it gives you a closer relationship than maybe just driving through once, might give you. So in my discipline of marine biology, there was also sort of an artistic aspect, and I enjoyed the photography, and I also did quite a bit of marine life illustration. I still do sometimes, a little bit less nowadays, but this is a sturgeon. So talking about the freshwater ways like the Charles River, the Wewiantic, a Ponegantset River right where I am, Acushnet River, there's so many, Mystic River, Connecticut River obviously goes up through Massachusetts and continues on towards Canada. Sturgeon, actually, Atlantic sturgeon were once really common. They were small advisory crafts in the 18th century, because they're huge fish. They grow to be, 7-8 feet long, probably bigger. And they've got these bony scutes that run along their back and all. And they would break water, certain times of year when they were running. They were quite active, and they're big fish. And we would hunt them on a regular, because we consider them really healthy to eat certain times of year, just like we had harvest of sharks sometimes, certain times of year as well. We use the skin and the teeth. We had uses for all parts of our animals. And so this is a watercolor of an Atlantic sturgeon, but I've actually never seen one in the wild. I've obviously, working in biolabs and stuff, or at the colleges, there were preserved specimens of young sturgeon. But, it would be extremely special. I hear about small ones struggling up the Charles or struggling up the Connecticut, but it would be amazing to see the population come back. And then this is another quick photo of a tautog that I illustrated. You'll notice as we talk about fish in the Northeast, and I would assume it's true in other parts of the country, but you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But we had a lot of newcomers coming here. They weren't really familiar with the species of fish or the clams that we were harvesting. And so they very quickly adopted our words for those. So tautog, scapog, or scup as people call them nowadays, squeetig, weakfish. Those are all from our language. I think, I was looking at the origins of the word squid, and it pops into existence around 1605, which is almost a sure bet that it's a native word. You can look at European languages and see what they were calling squid in their languages, and it wasn't squid. And so it just gives you an idea of the amount of trade and traffic, and just like buying fish from native people, probably native women coming into an English town. They had done some fishing, were unloading their excess catch, for some goods or whatever, novelty items, who knows, news, whatever. And so very quickly it got adopted. So there's a lot of Wampanoag actually in the English language as a result of that. The word quahog is just a shortened version of our word pukwahog for the hard shell clam, the bivalve that we eat a lot of. You know, it's used in clam bakes, it's used in chowder, it's used in you know, stuffed quahogs. We were just talking about this in the chat. It's really good stuff. And then the shell, of course, is beautiful and thick and very substantial and used and carved up into jewelry and beads and commemorative objects, belts, alliance collars, things that had to do with creating social and ceremonial relationships, you know, coming out of a really wholesome ocean, from a really slow growing clam that had kind of sucked up that richness of being there. And then being, you know, being a medium for us to share with other Native nations and to create relationships and record things that we considered important and that we still consider important today. These are some photographs of the plants that I use. So when I practice my arts, I have my wampum is sort of like later in the slideshow, but these are some of the plants. So I use milkweed and I use butterfly weed and I use Indian hemp, and those are all related. They're, you know, Asclepias and Apocynum. They grow over a large portion or maybe the majority of North America, I believe. So really common, nice fibers, not from the pods, as a lot of people think, but actually peeled from the stem of the plant. This is a shot of butterfly weed from my garden. And as I was learning more and more about plants and looking for different species and checking the woods in this area, especially for different kinds of trees and different kinds of plants and foods and medicines, I began to see really firsthand how rare things were, or where things were completely extirpated from the area. So I feel like the animal species get more like airtime, you know, so you hear about whales or you hear about like, oh, well, maybe not so much, but we used to have a sea mink in this area. We used to have a species of cod that's gone. We had a Labrador duck. We had auks, which are flightless birds that are now gone. But I don't know, like, I feel like the plant extinctions are going on right under our nose. And it's pretty devastating, I think, in my opinion, in this area, because there's been so much development for so long. So what I try to do is find seeds and harvest, or buy seeds, you know, as often as not where I can, and grow those things in my yard on my property. And I hope that it does a few things. One is it's beautiful. It helps the pollinators, makes birds really happy because they've got a ton of things to forage. But it also is a chance for animals and birds to grab the seeds and distribute them all over the suburbs and make them less stupid and boring and bring back some actual plants that should be here, keep the deer much healthier and the turkeys healthier and all, and just kind of bring things back. You know, I think if everybody did a small scale restoration on their properties, we'd be in much better stead, you know, now. I don't think it's too late to turn things around, but, you know, I don't have the ear of everybody, so who knows. There's some spun milkweed. This is a hand spun 2-ply, just a color sampler that I had put together. And I use things like black walnut from our territory. It's a tree, you know, you take the nut husk. There's bloodroot, there's logwood, which would be a trade material actually from the Caribbean. It's sustainably harvested by folks down in that area. I think most recently I was getting some from Dominica. There's some lac or cochineal there. There's the yellow's a little delicate. I could have used either sunflower petals or I could have used sumac wood or something like that. And then there's some natural at the end. I had really bad water quality here. We're really close to the area where it's treated. So they over-treat with chlorine because they want the chlorine to last in the water supply all the way to the end of the line. So every year we get this notification of, oh, your water's testing really high for, you know, this, and this, because they're by law obliged to let us know. This is just drinking water, so God knows what's happening to our poor ocean with this stuff. And so we actually, my family and I invested in a whole house water filter, which is expensive as heck. And the water definitely, it's much cleaner and it no longer makes our throats burn, which is always a plus. But I also found that I can't exactly get the same colors because the crap that was in my water before helped to develop certain colors. And so now, like, I'll get more of a plum purple where I used to get a bluer purple. So there was probably like iron and stuff like that in my water. So I have to either add those things back or like go to a relative who still has bad water and do my natural dyes. So I do workshops. I've done workshops in community and workshops in like tribal artisan programs and associated with colleges as well. Like Evergreen, had me come out and do a program for their basket weavers. And the water quality thing, just to finish up on that, it's like a reoccurring theme in my life. When I was working for my tribe's natural resource department, we did an island-wide tribal member water survey, and up island, people dig their own wells. You have your own well and you get your water, and the mineral profile is a little bit different there because it's a unique area where the land was kind of pushed along and maybe upended in some places and turned around by the glacier. And the mineral profiles, instead of being real horizontal in some places, are like vertical instead. So you might dig somewhere and get way too much iron, dig somewhere else and get way too much of something else, and then you choose the right spot. Or you dig someplace, the wrong place, and then you spend a lot of money on a really expensive water filtration system so you can drink your water. And I remember I was a lot younger, just still in college, and someone said, oh yeah, it's gonna cost us $8,000 to, it was an elderly woman and her daughter. And I just remember thinking, oh my God, how are you? I was already sort of horrified about like how much I was spending for rent just so I could work for my tribe, and how much I was spending for money. And I drove a van, so I didn't look at the gas pump because I just like couldn't process the amount of money that gas costs on the island. Everything's higher. And I just thought on top of that, because we can't just go, and get our water at the springs, which were reliably really clean and super healthy. And sometimes they're spiritual places too, right? So you should go and partake and have a daily experience of those, we were digging wells to kind of fit in with the way of doing things that people have now. And it's actually kind of risky health-wise if you don't have the money to maintain a decent filtration system. So it's only tribal housing that really has the water treatment plant, where they kind of standardize everything and filter stuff out. So yeah, water quality it's huge, especially in certain places. It's really huge. And then we monitored water quality in the Sound, and already 20 years ago or more, soft shell clams were becoming much rarer in certain areas on Martha's Vineyard because the climate was changing. So already people knew, life was changing and things were becoming less abundant. The quahog is a really armored shell. So it's, still with us in good numbers, although there's a lot of fishing pressure. But I think, my big question mark is ocean acidification and larval stages of all of these fish that we depend on and used to depend on, and all of these shellfish, and what's going to happen to the marine plants and things like that as well in an acidic environment. I just don't necessarily have the answers. I think we should try, like heck, to help species come back and to reduce our carbon footprint. But I sense that we'll also have to do some level of adaptation to new ways and new scales and new seasons and things like that. So some of what I do with my wampum, which is made from the quahog shell, wampum is also a native word, wampum peak for the beads, is to create objects of diplomatic significance that demonstrate connection to the earth and the cosmos and the ocean, and that were displayed especially by traditional leadership, because they were held accountable to those sort of standards of, constancy. So this is a sun symbol. It has a 4-directional symbol in white on the purple if you look at it closely, and there's some dyed deer skin, and it's a large medallion pendant worn on the chest by men and women. And it was something that I was able to reference during the Cape Winds controversy. It was a tough situation to be in because I think, there was a move to place industrial size wind turbine farm, I guess you would say, off Martha's Vineyard, but like not really off Martha's Vineyard, in water so shallow that you could go wading in it. And it was really warm water and really rich water, and it was fairly clean, and it was basically nursery habitat for a lot of important species. A lot of our tribal members are fishermen and women, shellfishermen and women. Those of us who aren't doing it like actively enjoy those foods for sure. But it was also an important viewshed having to do with sunrise ceremony and the origin of the creation of the island. There's a lot of old stuff, old ancient stuff tied in with that, and tied in with the sun symbology and being people of the first light, people of the East who had the responsibility to greet the sun in the morning. And so I was able to use our material culture, our traditional arts, to demonstrate our connection to certain places in certain ceremonial ways, and that we still value those, and those are still really key. You know, it's in our name. And so that figured in there. It was just tough to look like we were against, you know, green energy or greener energy, you know, for a tribal person. It was a funny spot to be in, but you know, that was the truth of the matter. Was it was a poorly cited project. This is a belt that I wove last year, actually, called Out of the Ocean. And this was going to be for one of those exhibits planned for 2020. Of course, COVID hit, so I didn't get to travel and see the opening, but this is all made from large, individually made quahog shell beads. So you see the nice color contrast, and maybe you can see how you could use the shell to have symbols and motifs woven into belt form or flag form, however you want to say it, or collar form, and communicate, you know, certain values, certain ceremonies, certain origins, numeric patterns for like seasons and certain things that go on, clan beings and clan identity and stuff like that woven into belts. And the fiber actually that I wove it on is actually hand spun milkweed that I dyed with, I think I used madder, and I definitely used logwood for that rich blue purple that I was getting with my bad water before I got my water filter. So this is a substantial piece. It's not huge, you know, it's probably around 20 inches long, give or take, but it has that great substantial weight that quahog has. It's a very heavy shell, so you can usually differentiate between real quahog and some other shell that someone carved like it. One is through looking at the color and the quality of the white and the purple, and the other is just the incredible weight of the quahog shell. It's pretty remarkable. It's very present when you're wearing it. It's, you know, quill work is lovely too. This is some quill work here that's naturally dyed. So part of my work was recapturing a range of natural dyes and a range of natural mordants. I was looking for non-toxic materials because as a weaver, I've been weaving since I was a kid, but you know, once I got older and I was able to get a full-time job at a museum, you know, weaving outfits for like 80 people or something like that for one project. It was like a dream job, you know, as an artist. But I found that I would cough at the end of each day weaving, and I thought, wow, I better check what this fiber is and what the dyes are, because something's not right here. And then I really started thinking about, like, I'm at the beginning of my career, and you know, if I do this for a lifetime, I'm not going to be healthy. And so I just started to do as much work as I could, just looking at old tribal accounts, talking to people, explorers, anything I could find, basically, to give me insights into traditional dyeing. And it also tied into my work trying to find plants for these types of endeavors as well, and encouraged me to do even more gardening. So it was kind of a self-feeding cycle. Wow. And water quality is so key for fish and such. So, yeah, this is a corn belt. And quill work with natural dyes again. This is a bear map that I did recently. I wanted to, it was a sort of a concept of the land as a living entity, to think about respecting the land, the need to respect the land and respect seasonal cycles and what the earth itself needs, as opposed to prioritizing strictly humans. And then this is my last slide. This is a series of wampum necklaces in the quahog shell. There's a shark effigy, there's a manitou face, a shield and feather pendant, and then this is a killer whale, which is a species that used to be common out here, but for a long time, with collapse of certain fisheries and, intolerance of predator species and stuff like that, hasn't been for quite a while. So, and that's, I think, the end of my presentation.
Much. Yeah, that was beautiful work and very in-depth descriptions of the connectedness of everything. So, colleagues, I believe that puts us on to Cynthia. All right, Cynthia, she is going to, let's see, provide a presentation about continuing the thread of culture preservation and in her community and keeping the language alive. Cynthia.
Okay. Doing my best here to share. So hopefully is that up?
It's there. All you need to do is click present.
Okay. It's really small. So I apologize, everybody. I'm the one that they've had to work the most with technology. So is that working now?
Just
What
I say no,
happened?
click on present, Sonny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just do it again. You
Uh-oh.
almost got it. Just go back in.
I'm sorry,
That's all
guys.
right.
Is it there?
Now go back to share screen. There you go. Yep. Now go to your presentation.
Okay. It's like really small. I don't know how to make it bigger.
We'll get there once you get your presentation up.
Okay. I can't even see where the present
Well,
is.
first of all, you got to get the presentation up. It's not up yet.
Okay. It was just here. I
Is
swear,
that
you
the blue
guys.
tag there on the left? No, that's not
This
it. That's
one?
not it. That's not it. Go back to the. I think you might have closed out of your presentation, Sonny.
Okay. Sorry.
So again, I want to thank everybody for hanging out. I mean, these stories are amazing. We are running a bit behind time, but Sonny has a great story to share about language adaptation and sort of helping sort of cultural awareness spreading out. So it's well worth sticking around for. And after that, we'll just do a quick check-in to just sort of see where everybody's at, if there's any bubbling up immediate questions. And then we'll provide, some feedback if we have the time, if people want to stay on. And then we're also going to, give everybody the link to see The Wild, the film that is about the area where Melanie Brown fishes, and the amazing coalition of people that are fighting against the threat of the massive pebble mine. So, that's really important. It's a powerful movie, great storytellers, both indigenous and non-indigenous. So it's definitely worth it. It's at 7:00 tonight. Hey, Sonny, open the presentation in the separate window. There you go. Yeah, so click on the image on the right where your presentation is, and then click present.
Okay. Is it on there?
Yes, excellent.
Can you guys see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, finally. All right, big breath because I was waiting with it on there forever and then I messed it up, so I apologize. First, I just wanted to start out by saying happy spring equinox to everyone. And I'm just going to do my best to follow my PowerPoint presentation. But, you know, sometimes I leave it to the creator to, you know, bring out whatever needs to be said. So here I go. So Dillaha, she who she, Sentai Steinruck. I'm a member of the Talawa Dene Nation, but I'm also absentee Shawnee from my dad's side. And so I'm actually filling in for my cousin as well. She unfortunately couldn't be here today, so her name is Marva Sihutesna Scott. And first I wanted to give acknowledgement to our lineage, and that's basically our bondage, you know, our bond to resiliency. And our grandmother and her siblings and her mother were a big part of who we are to keep our identity alive. And so we wanted to share these pictures of our gram. So our territory is, you know, from Southern Oregon down into Northern California along the coast. And it's basically redwood country where we come from. And we have the Smith River and also the wild rivers up into the Oregon. And today I was just going to talk briefly. It's really quick, little glimpse into work that I've done in the past and will continue to do because it is part of who we are as stewards. I was our tribe's tribal heritage preservation officer for over 12 years, and we helped develop the program through National Park Service. And I was able to work directly with land managing agencies and other project entities and developers, and you know, different levels of agencies to protect cultural resources, sacred places, landscapes, and looking at how we could collaborate together on, you know, a project, but then also protecting the resources that we needed to. And part of what I felt was so important about the TIPO was that we were a constant reminder to those agencies and those managers that we are still here. We care about things. We are part of this environment. You cannot take our native knowledge and impacts out of the environment. And so we have to, you know, be considered on all levels. And so that was really important for me to be able to work with others and be that constant reminder. Learning to speak each other's language, TIPO style. So when I first became TIPO, it was a huge learning curve for me. I learned really quick that we live in a don't ask, don't tell society. And so I had to really formulate questions quickly and be able to ask the right questions to be told what was really going on. And so as part of that, we just, you know, started learning more about different laws and regulations. And so we were able to try to build that bridge between the agency and the tribe, and making those connections with communication and also collaboration. And so it's just part of being able to work together. You have to be able to do that. And unfortunately, you know, us as tribal people, we don't have the luxury of only learning maybe one law or one regulation, and that's our specialty. Unfortunately, we have to learn a lot about everything so that we can ask the right questions, you know, whether it's, you know, when I was working in TIPO, if it was AB 52 or, you know, whatever the situation was calling for, I had to kind of at least know what was going on so that I asked the questions. And I was kind of envious sometimes of people that were able to just concentrate on one law or one specific thing because, you know, they didn't have to venture out and have to know a lot of different things. But, you know, as tribal people, I feel like that's just our place, that we have to take on those responsibilities because we inherit those, the advocacy of those resources and those that came before us. So as part of that, we formulated the Cal Tippo Coalition. and basically we're just bringing together all the Tippos to say, hey, this is what's going on. If you have this agency, maybe, talk to this person or link into this. So we're just really a support group. But one thing I just wanted to mention was we would pick like an agency every conference and really try to collaborate and work with them and maybe understand their processes, but then also have them understand tribes processes. So, understanding that you can't just send us a notification of a project and give us 15 days to respond and that's it. Check your box and you're done. We had to, say, hey, look, we have to take it through, our culture committee. We take it to our tribal council. I mean, depending on what the project called for, it would just depend on what we had to take the proper steps. And so just kind of like letting agencies and others know this is how we also work. And so sharing that knowledge and them also learning, accepting that there's different ways to deal with different tribes and that we're all unique individual nations. One large project that I did work on was the Marine Life Protection Act. This act, it hit like really started working in about 2010, and it was developing these reserves in California along the coast to protect the marine resources. And they started in Southern California, and by the time they got up to Northern California, we had heard about this happening, and so we all band together and we had huge rallies where we would go to the public forums and advocate and share stories about our connection to the land, to the resources, and how important it was for us as Indigenous people to eat our traditional foods and maintain those lifeways. And it was incredible how many people showed up and came in full force to share this knowledge and to support one another, but also say, hey, you guys need to consider tribal involvement in this. We're not just a public, part of Joe Public. You need to come to our tribal nations and talk to our governments. And out of that, I felt like it really stemmed to them to recognize tribal take and subsistence harvesting, because we weren't part of the two categories that they already had, which was commercial and recreational use. And so they had to really, take a step back and say, okay, how are we going to deal with the tribes and access and reserves and all these different takes in Northern California? And one thing that did come out of that with our tribe was our ocean governance team, where we were able to go after grants and seek grants to, help develop our own regulations and codes for asserting our tribal sovereignty. And so, just keeping moving forward with that momentum. In our territory, we do have a reserve that's right where our fish camp is, but we were able to get that designated that we can still surf fish there. So there's that, and then also perch. So what does TEK really mean? And I was thinking back when I was at Tippo, I was like, man, you know what? We really need to live TEK, not just talk about it, So how do we do that? And so part of that was during fish camp, being able to attend meetings while you're at camp. So, still involved with that traditional side of it, but also conduct business at the same time. And so we were trying to find that level of, commitment to being who we are as Indigenous people, but then also, okay, I'm still Tippo, I'm still doing my work, and we're still protecting things that need to be protected and be that voice. This is pictures of us at fish camp, and then also my nieces and my daughter gathering seaweed, just showing the connection that we have to the resources that we harvest. So this is some more pictures of, traditional foods. And what's really important is that, we have that access throughout each season. So whatever, comes about for that season to go harvest, that we're able to have that relationship with that food, have the relationship with the land, and be able to eat the way we've always eaten. So what's it mean to have mindful harvesting? This is really important for me as a Native mother, teaching our children, and it was important when I was a kid for my mother to teach me. It's that you always acknowledge the resources that you're taking, and we have to always be always thankful for what we're taking, because it's like a life that we're removing. And so no matter if it's a root or a deer or whatever it is, that we're giving that thanks, that they're giving their life to help feed us and sustain us. And so it's just that recognition and saying, that we believe that is, they're giving. And also, not taking too much from one place. You don't want to overharvest one spot and take all those resources so they can't replenish. Rotate. So like if we were to go get maple bark, you don't want to take and strip all the maple bark off of the tree. You take, on one side, and then the next year you take another side, and you let that resource replenish itself and heal, and then it can provide more for you. Because if you're just going to go, take all the resource at one time, it's, takes that imbalance out of our earth and throws us out of whack. So this is my niece. She's canning up some salmon. We're cooking salmon on a stick, and just showing that we are still here. We're going to eat what we want, that we've always eaten, and this is part of who we are. So this is our ceremonial time. Our Nadash is one of our most sacred times of the year. It's our winter solstice, and it's when we pray for everything on earth, and we show our gratitude for that, and for everything that's given to us. And if we don't do that, it's like we're not balancing the earth. So it's that recognition and that putting forward those prayers, that energy for to maintain who we are and our value system. And I feel like once you have that, it roots you, it grounds you to who you are, and it helps you develop as you grow along, that you're connected to something, and that's vital. And I feel like the kids need that, our youth need that, and then they can always rely on those values and those beliefs if they something comes up. So we're just sharing some more of our foods. I really love the picture of the kids in the canoe. It's a redwood dugout canoe. We had not had a canoe in our river for 150 years. And so when we were able to place that canoe in the water and get our kids in there, it was pretty powerful. This other picture in the middle is of sand bread. And it's actually not, we don't actually cook in the sand, we cook in rocks. But what was important about this picture to me is that we actually used acorn flour for the bread, and we feel fortunate that we were able to harvest enough to be able to provide that acorn flour to make the bread with. Here we are at fish camp. I mean, these are just some fish camp pictures, and just the bonding time that we spend with each other, but then also the connection to the food and to all of our resources. So an annual fish camp is all the family come down. We camp for over a week, or depending on if we get fish, then we stay longer till the fish is dried. So it's showing the upper corner on the right is the fish when we first catch them, and we put them on these sand beds with the grass. And traditionally we would put little pebbles and lay those out on the beds on the top, because you don't want to just lay your fish down on the sand. So it's kind of this barrier. Well, my great grandfather saw the European beach grass that was growing right on the bank, and he's he came up with the idea to put the grass down. And so my family is a little different in that way, that we use the beach grass instead of the rocks. But I mean, it still works. It's, you know, adapting to our environment and what's going on. So we also we were thinking about, you know, how do we keep in balance? And part of that is learning the teachings of our ancestors and what our family believe in and our people. And so some of those are, you know, whatever you want, you have to pray for it. Whatever you gather, you know, you have to take care of it and don't take more than what you need. There's what goes around comes around, like what you send out into the universe, it comes back. So that's important for us to, you know, teach our kids, and even for us to live by daily. This is another, you know, smelt picture. So now the smelt is more dried in the sun. We flip them, we turn them twice a day. And then now the process is that we take them off the grass and put them directly on the sand so that they dry. Once these are cured, if they don't get wet or damp, they last for like 2 years. And so this practice is really important because, you know, we introduce our children to smelt as soon as we can. One of our ways that we introduce our children to it is we give them a dried smelt and they chew on it when they're teething. And so it's almost like, you know, they just get used to the flavor and the taste of it. And plus, you know, it feels good to, you know, rub their gums on the fish. But fish camp isn't just about catching fish for us. It's also a time that we come together. We learn language. We hang out with each other, we make food. I mean, there's just so many bonding opportunities and connection to the place and to our people that, you know, it is about fish, but it has a greater meaning as well. Here was our values must lead us in all we do, and every connection we have is intentional. So it's an intentional harvest of that size of mussel. You know, you're not going to take the small mussels and you're not going to take the really big mussels. It's an intentional harvest. It's an intentional connection to the food that we're taking. So here's some seaweed and some delicious abalone. And our tools are also part of our environment and who we are. So on the left is actually my cousin's holding up the bread, but we were making sand bread in a pit, not on the beach this time, but for an event to share out our foods with others. And so we actually make the fire has to be really hot and get those rocks super hot. And then we make the bread and we actually use our paddle, move the rocks over, and then put the bread inside, lay it down in the rocks, and then cover it. And then it cooks it. And what you end up getting is like divoted bread, but the outside's crunchy and the inside's moist. The black rocks, that's how we cook our acorns. Those heat up really well and they don't crack as often. And so that's how we warm and cook our acorns. The dip nets are up on the top. That's how we catch our surffish, the pestle, and then the sticks are redwood sticks that we cook our fish on. So looking at, you know, how we practice what we know is to ensure survival in a world that can disappear. And we were thinking about that, you know, it's because if we don't make it a priority, it can disappear. If we don't make it a priority for our kids to learn these things, then who else will? So we don't want that, you know, we want to keep that, like we said, that foundation for them going. And so we're teaching weaving and eating traditional salmon, bread, clam chowder, whatever is in season is what we try to, you know, provide. This is some more food pictures that we have. So this is also just really important to validate and acknowledge that, you know, this is part of our sovereignty and our responsibilities to bond with the food, to bond with those places. I just love this picture. Marva, my cousin, she does really awesome quotes and photos. And so it's just kind of saying thank you to our homelands, because our homelands provide everything that we need. Teaching and sharing is important, involving the younger generations, because when they feel that they can move forward and have that connection as well. I'll just share a little story really quick. A couple years ago, we were down at fish camp, and the fish started running, and the seagulls and all the birds were like diving down, and we really look for the pelicans. When the pelicans are diving, then we know the fish are running. And it was so crazy because all the birds were flying around, and we were like, hey, the fish are running, the fish are running. And so we, got the nets down, go get the buckets, and we're like yelling, and it's chaotic, and the kids are trying to catch fish with their hands. And it was just really neat, and it was just a beautiful day. And what was so powerful about it was later on, all of us looked at each other, and there was like no adult there, which is kind of funny to say, but we looked around, there was no one older than us there except for our generation. And then later on, like my uncle and my auntie and my mom came down, and they were so proud of us because they said, now we know our work's done, that, we installed that value in you guys know what to do, and it's going to live on. And so that was an important story for me, that, we can do this, and we have it in us, and we're going to pass it on to our children. So, and here's some of our kids, canning fish, cracking acorns, making necklaces. So just standing up for what we believe in and protecting Mother Earth is who we are as a people. Down on the left bottom is when we went to one of the public hearings for the MLPA work, and we were sharing songs and stories about our connection to the marine life. And the bottom right is when the DAPL came out, and we were just like, we got to stand together in unity. Language is really important because it gives you your worldview and how you see things and perceive. And so it's just embedded in who we are, and, how you see that resource is also in the language. So, if you, an example of that would be, for us, a dolphin is actually a sea friend. And so seeing that as that connection is important, and how you have that worldview. Here we're cooking some more bread, cleaning stuff, so we can share with the community. Some of the connections that we have is, and not just the connections, but also the sharing and the intention is that we pray for things. We're thankful for things. We give back. Allow yourself to, feel the feelings and the experiences. And then always, of course, share your knowledge, share your feelings, share your thoughts. These are some pictures of just us all gathering with, strong women that teach us a lot of things and embrace us who we are, and, continue on. Us on the river. And then this is also a sturgeon. Sturgeon's important to us. And this is my last and final slide, so give the world good energy.
Thank you, sometime. Well, Collis, where we at?
I hope
You're fine.
Sunny, thank you so much. That was amazing. I'm starving now, so thank you for that too. But it, I think the importance of, passing on the tradition, that's such a huge part. And you mentioned in the chat, curriculum. Well, that's part of it. I mean, that's in-home curriculum, but it also needs to go outside of that. And that's part of the sort of, as we're talking about broadening awareness, making these cultural traditions something that other people understand and can relate to. I think that's a big part of broadening awareness and getting a collective understanding of why these cultural traditions are so important, why the lessons that we can all learn from the balance in nature that you are teaching your children, and that you were taught. That's important. I love that traditional ecological knowledge. That's great. Mindful harvesting. I mean, that this is all, again, sort of that understanding. So we've gone long, but the stories have been fabulous. If people want to stay on, I guess we could try to open it up to some Q&A here. But I think this is a good first conversation. I would like to see more of these conversations. Not just happening in Slowfish, but everywhere else. And so if we can all sort of approach this from an open mind in terms of like how we can share these stories and how we can sort of bring them into our own perspective, but make sure that others around us are, thinking in those terms. So I just, I would like to say thank you to everyone who has taken part in this panel for the past several weeks. I have learned so much. I mean, one thing that I will quote Hillary is saying to me is, sometimes it's just important to listen. And I've done a lot of listening in the past few weeks as we've all come together, spent a lot of time to sort of craft this conversation. And I've learned so much from you all. So I just want to say thank you to Jonathan Perry, Melanie Brown, Buck Jones, Santaye Steinrich, Elizabeth James Perry, Hillary Rennick, and Noah Wakabushka. Both of you, Hillary and Noah, were so instrumental in coordinating this discussion. You both did a fabulous job. I also want to shout out to Marva Sinkutasna, as Sunny had mentioned. She was also with us, spent a lot of time in these discussions and helping to share stories. She couldn't be here. She had to go to a tribal council meeting, which is very important. So again, thank you all for all of your time, for sharing all of these perspectives and enlightening us. I also just want to give a quick shout out to Kaylee Mazzocoli and Jennifer Halstead, who have been working furiously in the background to make sure all of this is going steadily. And also want to turn it over to Kelly Collins-Geyser, our MC, so she can give us some parting notes. And then after that, Sunny, if you're still on, we'd love to hear you send us off with some powerful words, if that's okay.
Hi, everyone. So thank you, everyone who presented today. That was very powerful. And I just wanted to go over a few notes ending today. The Wild film tonight is at 7 p.m. and the link is in the expo. Also, if you haven't registered for next week, please do so after this in the registration page, main page here. And you can also sign up for the Marketplace of Ideas next Thursday. Oh, thank you for putting that in the box there. Let's see, here we go. In the chat box, I just put it in, and had other things to say here. Last Man Fishing is also in the expo for if anyone wants to see the film, and there's also a link to some of the panel discussions from last night. And I hope that you'll all stay on if there's more questions or conversations going on about what we just heard today, and information on climate change and access will continue on next week with our bigger deep dive discussions on aquaculture and the Blue Commons. And I will see you next Thursday morning and introduce our next big deep dive discussion on aquaculture, which should be exciting, facilitated by Haley Templeton. And thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks. And you know, if you all want to stick around for other discussions, that's great. I just wanted to check in with Sunny. Are you good, Sunny? You I don't know if you're still on or not. You've done so much already, so. But yeah, again, thanks everybody for joining the conversation. And I do really encourage you to check out the Wild tonight, because it is such a well done video of what's at stake, again, for trying to take care of the natural resource.
Right, so the Wild will play on a different platform, but the link you'll get in the expo here on the Hopin platform, and that'll be followed also by a panel and the filmmaker.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thanks everybody. Great conversation. Hopefully we will see you this evening at the Wild, because there will be a panel discussion with Mark Titus. He's the director. Also with Melanie and Steve Kurian, who was a speaker yesterday in the supply chain discussion, as well as Chef Tom Douglas, who sources all of his wild salmon from Bristol Bay, and Dr. Daniel Schindler, who is a scientist and is an amazing researcher, and he just tells such a compelling story about the ecology of why it's important to preserve the salmon habitat. So thank you all. We will see you later on. Take care.
Thank you.